Welcome. This is MoneyHeart, where we explore the emotional side of money. I'm Camille Diaz, and today we're discussing stopping sex trafficking. My guest is Amanda Catarzi. She's a strategist and the owner of Inquiry Co. Amanda, welcome to MoneyHeart.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I am so grateful that you have agreed to join us today. And before we start, I want to give a trigger warning to our audience. On this episode, Amanda is going to share her story, and we're going to be really real. Not that we aren't on other episodes, but this one's going to be a little extra. We're sharing this topic to shed light on a really big issue, and we hope that this will help to save others, especially young children. So Amanda, kind of clue us in here. How big is sex trafficking anyway?
It's huge, especially in America, which most people think of sex trafficking and they think of a foreign country, which, yes, it's happening in a lot of foreign countries, but it's also happening here in America. It's the second largest illegal enterprise in America. So you have drug trafficking, then you have sex trafficking, and then you have illegal arms dealing, which you hear a lot about these two, but you don't hear about sex trafficking so much. Right. So it's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, that is a really big deal. What is your story? I know when you filled out the form, I was kind of reading through it and I'm going, okay, so circus and cult and sex trafficking. Oh my gosh. And I don't actually know the whole story. So you pick where you want to start and just kind of share whatever you're comfortable with.
Okay, sure. So we'll start from the beginning.
Cool.
My family was brought to America from Italy by the Ringling Brothers Circus. So we have this very loud, very wild Italian circus family. And my parents grew up in that kind of very gypsy lifestyle environment. And they met each other in the circus. And so when they had my brother and I, they wanted something completely different for us. They didn't want the crazy, dysfunctional drug, sex, rock and roll kind of lifestyle. They wanted something very conservative. So they decided to homeschool us, which was not popular, 30 years ago. That was not a cool thing to do. There were not resources at all.
Right.
But this cult actually had a curriculum and resources on how to raise godly children. So my parents, new to faith, new to the whole conservative ideas, was like, holy cow, this is an amazing opportunity. They have the curriculum we need. They can basically tell us how to be good parents because we never had them. So it was a really big win for them. And they thought they were doing what was best for us. So my parents are incredible humans. They did much better than their parents did. So no shame on them. We're best friends now, but it was definitely they were taken advantage of. By the cult. So
yeah. Wow. Okay. So they thought they were doing the right thing by, hey, they've got this school curriculum and they're going to help us and it's going to all be great. And it wasn't maybe so much on the up and up as originally planned. No. How did the sex trafficking come in?
Well, most adults who are in sex trafficking have a background of childhood sexual abuse. About like 98% of them. 100% of the victims I work with, but we're just going to say 98% to be a devil's advocate here. So I was basically groomed and taught to be a wife. That was my only occupation in the future. I was supposed to have as many babies as possible. I was taught that you never say no to your husband. You always submit to them. And I was kind of set up for having a much older male partner. So even the child books I read, the girl would always marry the father's friend. So, and we would always be searching for someone who had a house, had money, could fully support me so I could be a stay-at-home mom. So that was kind of a dysfunctional setting that set me up for failure in the future. I was also never allowed to have opinions. I wasn't allowed to say I didn't want peanut butter and jelly, I wanted Nutella instead. Like those kind of opinions were discouraged, not allowed. I was supposed to have a bright countenance and keep my mouth shut, basically, and
Right.
make babies. And
Yeah.
that's what I thought God wanted for my life. So fast forward, I'm out of the cult. I'm 20 years old. And I have all these weird ideas about how relationships should work, male and female relationships should work. So when I was put in a precarious situation and I was lonely, and I had been molested by a neighbor, so I'd already been sexually abused, all of that stuff came up in the face of just doing life. If you don't resolve trauma, it always comes back up.
It sure
And a
does.
predator saw all of that on display and took advantage of it. So
Because you never, being that you were in the cult and that you were being raised there, you never saw any other situation being modeled. You probably didn't have access to movies or TV. You didn't go out, and there weren't like friends from other places. None of that. You weren't ever getting to see any of that.
No, not. I mean, one time I wore eyeliner, and one of the boys in the cult was like, "Why is Amanda dressed like a bad girl? Like, why does she look like a sinful girl?" And I was like, "Oh," like I was so embarrassed, but
Oh,
I just didn't know, and I found it and I put it on.
right. Yeah. Yeah.
So that gives like a very small view of how just ultra conservative it was. So yeah, definitely moving in. I'm 20 years old, or I'm about 22, 23 years old, and I'm so emotionally delayed. I'm so world experience ignorant that I didn't know how to do a dating relationship. I'd never been allowed to date. I didn't know how to talk to a man. I've never been allowed to talk to a man. So all of a sudden I have this respected individual who has a reputation of being an incredible human come into my world and tell me, this is how you do relationships. And okay. And so you just kind of go with it. Obviously there's checks inside of you, like red flags going off, but you're like, everything I learned wasn't true. So how do I know that this isn't true?
Right.
He's telling me it's true. I like him. He's hot. He's into me. So like, this is the first time I've had male affection like that. So I'm going to eat it up. And I did.
Well, and it sounds like you were taught to ignore any red flags in the past. So every time you thought, oh, this, even your eyeliner story, hey, this is kind of cool, I'm going to test it out. You were immediately taught, nope, that's the wrong thing to do. So every time your intuition spoke up, you were taught to shut it down. So of course, when it speaks up again, you're like, well, I'm just going to shut it down because that's what I'm supposed to do. And that's the right way. This older guy's telling me what to do. That's what I do. So, okay.
Yeah. And I was taught to always submit to a male authority. So that was really confusing, especially as things started to escalate. So I was dating him. I was in a romantic relationship with him. I'd already crossed so many boundaries to get to that point that it made it very easy for him to destroy any other or erode away boundaries. So it wasn't like, I start dating him and the next day he's sex trafficking me. I start dating him. He was also my boxing coach because I was fighting MMA at the time. And so he started managing all my fights. So technically he was sex and labor trafficking me because I never got any of the money from those fights.
I was wondering about that.
And I was really good. Not to toot my own horn, but I was pretty freaking good. So I won fights constantly. And there was the hope that, okay, you'll get into the UFC and you'll be a pro fighter. And he always told me that. So anyway, so the relationship started to escalate when, hey, this other guy thinks you're hot and that really turns me on. That's kind of weird, but okay. Like I can that makes me feel really wanted. Sure. But it's a very toxic thing, right? That kind of dialogue is a very toxic thing. And then, it'd be really hot if you hit on him, but you're coming home with me. Okay, now we're upping the ante a little bit. And I really want this guy to like me. I really want him to accept me. He's now paying for my apartment. He's training me for free. He's getting me all these fights. So I kind of owe him. So like, whatever, if that makes him happy. And then, you should do these sexual favors. Like, what? Hold the phone, not doing that. But then alcohol would come into play. So
Mhm.
I wasn't allowed to drink, but everybody around me was. And I was usually surrounded by mostly males. So then a lot of rapes started to happen. And
Mhm.
he was blackout drunk, of course. So he doesn't remember any of it, which who knows how true that is.
Yeah.
And, oh, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry the next day.
Right.
But the thing is a lot of people don't understand, like, how don't you just walk away from that? I had given so much to get to that point that I
Mhm.
had to make it worth something. There's a need, there's a drive to make it salvageable, to make
Right.
it worth something. I had violated myself so much up to that point, whether they were ridiculous boundaries or good boundaries, that I had to make it worth something. And a lot of victims feel that way when they're
Mhm.
in that relationship. They've had so much taken from them. They need to stay until they can get something back, but
Mhm.
that never happens.
Right.
And they either end up dead, or they get out.
Right.
So,
So, because, well, and that makes perfect sense because this wasn't like it happened in 2 weeks. This is a long period of time that you're with this person, and they've managed to get to the point where they're controlling all of your money,
mhm.
all of your income producing activities,
My food, my
where
diet,
you
because he's
live,
my coach.
what you eat, probably what you wear, because
Mhm.
if they have all the money, they're controlling what they buy and telling you what they want you to wear, who you talk to, who you hang out with, what you're influenced by. Like pretty much everything in your life is being controlled by this person. And it's not that you planned it that way, it sneaks up on you. It's like a little step and a little step and a little step.
Yeah.
So,
And he's 100% aware of what he's doing. I mean, it's typical predator behavior is you groom them and then you turn them out, which is the term when they start having their girls do sexual favors for other people. But there is a grooming process before that point. And
Right.
it's that dating relationship, usually gift buying, and now you feel indebted to that person. And then they ask you to return the favors. And that's when it gets into sexual exploitation. And also, he had me up on a Native American reservation because he was Native American. So I was insanely isolated.
Right.
And I was surrounded by people who were willing to kill me at the drop of the hat because I was just a Caucasian, well, Italian, but Caucasian female up on there. I didn't belong up there. And it was well known that I was there. And if I ventured outside of where I was supposed to be, I would be killed or raped.
Right. So you really didn't have even a feeling that you could leave if you wanted to.
Mm-mm. No.
How did you? How did you get out?
I was sent to see a John, which is the
Mhm.
term for men who buy women who are prostituting themselves. And I believe that prostitution and sex trafficking is the same thing. Not everyone believes that.
Mhm.
But I feel if a woman truly feels like she has options, she would not choose to sell her body. There's a few very small percentage of people that would say yes, that's their choice and that's what they want. I'd be curious to see if there was childhood trauma going on there.
Sure.
Anyways,
Sure.
so I use those terms interchangeably. So I
Okay.
was being prostituted. I was not, I was just obeying to survive. But
Mhm.
anyways, I went to go see this John. I did not want to sleep with him. I ended up knocking him out, fighting him and knocking him out. He was a fighter. And I left the gym because I was at a gym. I left the gym and someone ran a light and T-boned me in the
Oh,
truck
wow.
and totaled my truck. And there was a police officer right behind me. So he saw the whole thing. And that's the only time I've ever been knocked out, even in all my fights. That's the
Oh
only
my
time I've
gosh.
ever been knocked out. Yeah. And he came, I woke up and he had the door open. He had like wedged the door open with the jaws of life or whatever. And
Mhm.
he goes, "Oh my God, I thought you were dead." That was the first thing he said to me. I was like, "Oh, okay."
Wow.
And at this point, I'm used to having concussion on top of concussion on top of
Sure.
concussion every weekend. So I knew I had a concussion, but I was like, "Ah, it's just a concussion. I've had gazillions of these." When really I had severe brain trauma.
Mm.
And so I texted my trafficker and said, "Hey, I just almost died in a car accident." And he said, "Is your face effed up?" And I said, "No." And he goes, "Well, you're
Wow.
still effable then."
Yeah.
And And I'm like, will you pick me up? No, not going to pick me up. Wouldn't even come pick me up. And so I
Whoa.
had to call another John to come get me and pick me up and take me to the apartment. So at that moment, it was like coming out of water. I wasn't like, oh my gosh, I'm being sex trafficked. This is a highly traumatic situation. This is highly dysfunctional and toxic. It was like, something's wrong. This isn't who I'm supposed to be. I'm called to something greater, something different than this. This isn't the extent of who I am. And I need to do something right now about it, because I knew that window was very small and that I would get sucked back in if I didn't take action then. So the action I did take was to commit suicide.
Oh no.
And the brain trauma. And when people aren't aware of this as well, when you're faced with all your trauma, even in recovery, and this is why there's so many relapses in the addiction world, is because you no longer have that smoke screen up, and all those emotions and all of that trauma is in your face, and you're feeling all of it. In my case, my disassociation had disengaged, and I was aware of all my pain, of all the reality, of all the trauma. And that's insanely overwhelming to deal with. And that's why people relapse. That's why people go back to toxic relationships, because they're searching for something familiar in some way to get away from all of that information. So my choice was to commit suicide. And I woke up to him pumping my stomach somehow. And it wasn't like in a hospital. I don't know how I don't have memory of that.
Sure.
I just remember waking up and him pumping my stomach, or like I'd puked.
So you tried to take pills or something like that?
Yeah. And then one of his other girls was having issues, so he had to leave me at that point.
I was just about to ask you that, if there were other girls.
Yeah, there were two other women that I knew of.
Okay.
And one of them was really cool, and one tried to kill me all the time. So
oh my gosh.
She was always trying to stab me in parking lots. That was like her thing. So she's crazy. She was crazy.
Wow.
Which he made us crazy. Like looking back now, I was like, this crazy girl, like she needs some help. She's mental. No, he made us mental. Like he drove us to those points, and then made us compete against each other for his affection. So she's probably actually a really cool girl who was really screwed over by him. I don't know.
Yeah.
But she always tried to stab me. So he had to go deal with her. And I was like, okay, this is my second chance. I went and got a pit bull puppy, because I was like, if I have a puppy, I will have something to take care of and I won't try to kill myself. So that was my reasoning.
Yeah. Okay. I see it. I follow it.
And then I bought a plane ticket back to Florida. So this all happened in California, and I bought a plane ticket back to Florida because that's where my family was, and I didn't have anywhere else to go.
So he had managed to move you as far away as possible from any of your existing network, family, everything.
Well, I'd moved out there to go to school.
Okay.
So that was an act of rebellion towards my parents.
Sure.
Getting as far away as possible. But he did isolate me on top of the mountain in the Native American reservation. And I like stopped talking to everybody. I was like off the radar. So when I bought that plane ticket, I called my brother, him having no idea what's going on. I'm like, hey, I just got in a car accident. And he's like, Amanda, you need to come home. You just need to come home. Like, please come home. We want you here. And I don't know what drove him to say that kind of stuff, because he's a big brother, they don't say that kind of stuff to you. And it was like, okay, that's exactly what I needed to hear at that moment. Bought a plane ticket, packed like 3 suitcases full of stuff. I had like a whole life there. So I left behind tons of stuff. And I just left. I was sobbing my guts out. I had severe brain trauma, and I'm getting on a plane with this pit bull puppy. And that's how I made my escape. I thought he would come after me. I wanted him to come after me. That's how toxic that relationship was.
Yeah.
And of course he never did, because he's not going to chase me all the way to,
he's got other people.
He could just pick up another girl pretty easily. And that really messed me up for a while. because the one person who wanted me didn't want me anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I'd violated so much, given up so much to be with him, and then he just gave me up. So it took me a long time to build back my self-worth from that, but that's how I got away.
How did you build back your self-worth? How did you recover? Because, you're so awesome and well-adjusted and fabulous and career and all that stuff now. It's like, how did you go from that place of being like, I wish this guy that's been doing horrible things that I just ran away from would come try to get me back to where you are? Because that's huge.
I still didn't know what had happened to me. I began to realize that I was in an abusive relationship. I could accept that label, and I started consuming everything I could find on mental health and brain injuries, because I knew I had a lot of PTSD from just the car crash alone, not to mention all the fights and concussions I had before. And I knew that would cause emotional issues. So I started listening to podcasts. Andy Frisella and Ed Milet podcasts was basically the only thing I could consume and process. I believe in God. I have a lot of faith, but I couldn't stand it, because I felt it was a man that abandoned me, that didn't help me. It was that scenario that I felt was being played out, whereas like God was there all along. He got me,
Yeah.
I couldn't consume that, and I couldn't register that. I could register Andy Frisella and I could register Ed Milet, and I basically consumed everything they put out, everything I could find on the internet. And then when I felt like I was healthy, I decided to start applying for social work jobs for abused women. Like, I'm going to help these people. I'm awesome now. So I ended up applying, as fate would have it, for the only anti-sex trafficking organization in my own city, one of the best domestic anti-sex trafficking organizations in the nation.
Wow.
And they're called Selah Freedom, SELAH Freedom. Amazing organization. They hired me for some reason, and I became their intake counselor. So I'm interviewing women about their stories, determining if they fit the sex trafficking stuff, and then bringing them into our safe housings, into our programs.
Right.
So one day this girl's like, yeah, I was forced to fight. It was like a fight club, and I was being sex trafficked to all the fight teams. And I'm like, sounds really familiar. Like, and he was my boyfriend and he was my coach. And I'm like, and then it just like dawned on me. I'm like, holy cow, I was sex trafficked and I had no idea. So I went to my boss. I'm like, hey, we need to talk. This is what happened. This is my past. And they're like, holy cow, we need to get you in intensive therapy right now. So then they just paid for me to go to the same therapist that we sent all the women to. And they're one of the best PTSD therapists, trauma resolution therapists in the country as well. So I had the ability to start going to therapy, and 8 years later, I'm still going to the same guy. He's incredible. We just do checkups every now and then because life still happens. But John was a huge piece in my recovery, for sure.
Yeah. I love how this time you followed your intuition and then it totally worked for you.
Yeah, I mean, I had nothing else to lose,
Right? Yeah, sometimes it takes us a while to tap into what we already know. And you did it without trying to. Once you didn't have somebody else in your head, you just amazingly totally went to exactly where you needed to be and found out exactly what you needed to know and got the help that you really, really needed. So it's fabulous. I think that's a great lesson for everyone.
Totally. And I mean, I'm super, super fortunate, and I'm super, super blessed, because that's not that normal story. The normal story is women either die, are killed, murdered, being sex trafficked, or they die from drug overdoses, or they get arrested on a prostitution charge, which is insanely ridiculous because they're a victim, but okay. And then they end up with a record and a life of crime usually. And that's the reality of it. And it's pretty horrific that that's happened, that victims are being charged with felonies in this country.
Yes. What are some of the signs or clues that either this is happening to you or this is happening to someone you've met? How would you even spot this if you're on the outside? How do you spot this if it's you?
It's going to look a lot like a abusive relationship. So there's going to be a lot of isolating. There's going to be a lot of control. If all of a sudden this girl has an insanely controlling boyfriend, whether they're in person or online. So a lot of sex trafficking actually happens online, where young girls, minors, will meet a boyfriend, this Justin Bieber looking profile, when really it's, a 50-year-old man. And he'll coerce her into sending him a topless photo. Well, now he can profit off that photo, especially child pornography is huge. So he can make a lot of money off that. And he can use that as leverage against her moving forward. So if you don't send me another one, I will tell your parents, I'll post this all over Facebook, like I'll tell all your friends and they'll know. So they usually use that as a tactic. So in that case, that's technically sex trafficking, any sex act in exchange for something of value for minors. With adults, you have to prove fraud, force, or coercion, which is kind of really ambiguous things to prove, but it is doable. We've prosecuted quite a number of traffickers. But anything that looks like an abusive relationship, so controlling situations where she can't have her own phone, where he's in her phone all the time, where she can't make decisions for herself at all, he's making all the decisions for her. Situations where they're being isolated constantly, so they're not allowed to talk to their friends, not allowed to go to family events, things like that. A lot of times we see trafficking victims show up in an area and they don't know where they're at. They don't know landmarks in the city. They don't know what city name they're in because they're moved around so much and they're insanely sleep deprived normally. Another huge factor is if you see someone who looks kind of homeless and they have their nails done and they have maybe a Gucci bag. Like, how are you getting your nails done? And how are you getting your bag? Or how are you getting that, MAC makeup? And it's gifting to them from either Johns or pimps to kind of just keep pulling them along. And we see a lot of these girls use the ER as their doctor on a consistent basis. So unfortunately, they're marked up as prostitutes and criminals and sent on their way, or they're a rebellious teen running away from the foster care system, and they're already used to having a paycheck attached to them because of foster care, that they try to take the power back by trafficking themselves and getting their own paycheck instead of going to an abusive foster parent or something like that.
Wow. So what can we do to help stop this cycle? Like if you spot somebody, I'm guessing it's not easy to just say, hey, I can help you. Like
No.
what are the best things we can do? Is it to more donate to an organization that does have resources, or is there something we can do if we notice this somewhere? Like what's the next best step for people who now are like, I'm fired up, I really want to help, I have no idea how to help?
Do not approach the girl because she could get the hell beat out of her for talking to someone that she's not supposed to. So, and it potentially puts you in danger.
Right.
So do not, if you do approach her, maybe just give her a card or a number. So like the human trafficking hotline is a great place to start. I don't know their number off the top of my head. You can just Google.
I'll put it in the show notes, not a problem.
Yeah, the National Human Trafficking Network is fantastic. They have very discreet ways of handling victims that call them. And also Sail of Freedom also has a hotline that victims can call, and the people that answer are trained extremely well to handle trauma situations and dangerous situations. And they also have cards that they pass out, and they're very discreet. I think it doesn't even say Sail of Freedom on it. It just has a phone number and it says if you need help or something like that. So if a trafficker did find it, potentially wouldn't know what it was, so she wouldn't get punished for having it. So I would say call the human trafficking hotline or contact Sail of Freedom, and they know exactly what to do. Sail of Freedom is awesome because they partner with a lot of police forces and do a lot of police training. So I trained all of my local police about trafficking, and they're a lot more trauma informed than regular officers. So
I love that. That's awesome. Tell us what you're working on now. What are you most excited about?
So I'm super passionate about giving people a voice because I didn't have one the majority of my life. And so learning to use my voice I journaled the whole entire time throughout all of these experiences. So I have boatloads of journals next to me, and I became a really great writer through that. So now I'm super passionate about helping others in businesses, victims, whoever, find their voice and use it effectively, and use it to tell their story. So I run a copy and content agency called Inquiry Co. And that's literally what we do is we help businesses, nonprofits, entrepreneurs really express themselves efficiently and effectively.
That is so cool. I love how you
Yeah.
turned this into an advocacy for everyone. So cool.
Yes, I love it.
Thank you so much for being so open and sharing your story. I'm truly grateful. Thank you.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I love to help educate and inspire others to tell their stories as well.
Yes. If you want to get in touch with Amanda, she pretty much lives on Instagram. Her handle is at Amanda Catarzi. Thank you as well to all of our listeners and viewers. I'm your host, Camille Diaz. I'm a business optimization coach, financial educator, author, and speaker. You can contact me and find out what else I'm up to through my website, CamilleDiaz.com, or follow me on social media at Cam Unfiltered. Be sure to follow MoneyHeart at MoneyHeart Show, and our website is MoneyHeartShow.com. Amanda, do you want to share today's money mantra?
Sure. My money mantra is money is energy. So be aware of how you feel and the energy you're putting towards money, because you'll attract whatever you're putting out about money. So if you say, I hate money, or I don't have money, or money doesn't like me, money's going to feel that and have the same feelings towards you. So flip those negative money energies around into positive ones.
I love that. Thank you.